Back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much that you're still tuned in to the Sustainability Summit 2022. Please don't forget to furnish your comments at hashtag SUSWeek 2022 on all social media platforms. Thank you very much to Adam that has been chairing most of our guests to go onto the online exhibition. We truly appreciate it, and I think you are definitely worthy to be a prize winner. Once again, we do apologize for the crisis that we had with load shedding. We are now back on the grid. We are still with you and we are still serving content. Without wasting any more time, ladies and gentlemen, sponsored by the IDC, we are now about to engage about sustainable energy. And this will be led by a representative from the Industrial Development Corporation. She'll be kickstarting this segment of the conversation. We have Dr. Lwandle Mngadi, who is responsible for the investment and sustainability as a specialist at the IDC. Over to you, Doc. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invite, and thanks, Tabang. And I'm not sure whether it's fortunate, it's unfortunate for us to have this session whilst we are embarking on stage 5 and stage 6. However, having said that, I hope our conversation today is going to focus on the solutions that collectively, through our partnerships and through various engagements, I'm hoping that we can get after the session some form of an overview or a range of solutions that the country currently needs, and also that the continent currently needs when it comes to sustainable energy. As you've said, my name is Lwandle. I come from the Industrial Development Corporation. Those who are not familiar with the corporation, we were established in 1940 through an Act of Parliament, which is the Industrial Development Corporation Act number 22 of 1940. We're fully owned by the South African government, and what we do, we align ourselves with the national policy direction as set out in the National Development Plan, all our industry plans, master plans, and other relevant policies. And our mandate is to proactively maximize the country's development impact and the continent at large through effective and sustainable industrial development, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. In the next 5 years, we've set ourselves a target to actually disperse around 90 billion rand. On the next 3 years, this will result in up to about 100 jobs. We anticipate that. But what I must highlight that most of this investment, we aim to direct it to what we refer to as Black industrialists. We plan to direct this investment towards women entrepreneurs. We plan to direct this investment to our youth. Having said all of that, I've given you a little bit of background on who the Industrial Development Corporation. I'd like to get to the discussion at hand around sustainable energy. It's quite a complex issue, and there's a lot of structural issues which face the energy sector, and I'll tend to just focus on South Africa, but with the continent not far behind what we are experiencing in South Africa. We all know that there's a large scale of renewable energy gigawatts investments that we need in South Africa and across the continent. However, to just say that and say, if we put enough renewable energy into the grid, we'll solve all of our issues. And I think our panelists today will try and give us an overview of the complexity that is faced by the sector at this point in time. And some of the solutions which I hope the panelists will touch on today will be around how we can fast track the implementation of both the integrated energy plan and the electricity plan, with a very clear role on what the private sector can play in that space in ensuring that the implementation is fast-tracked. I'll be keen to hear more from the panelists, how they see their views basically around the operationalization of the new state-owned transmission company and what it would mean for them, be it from the nuclear space or from the private sector. We'll hear a little bit from Sasol. I'll also be keen to hear the role which they foresee us as the private sector or as industrialists in this country, driven by women, by the youth, and by everyone else I've mentioned earlier, the role that we can play in the restructuring of the electricity tariff so that we are able to deal with all of the energy poverty issues that we're facing. Whilst load shedding I see it as a symptom of a very structural and complex problem we're facing, there are issues of energy poverty which still engulf us, not just in South Africa, in the region and in the continent. So I'll be keen to hear a little bit about their views around that. The issues around embedded generation and distribution network infrastructure challenges that we're facing in South Africa, and that is slightly linked to the issues around the tariff, because that will also give us insights on how we can get involved with the whole debt issue facing Eskom. And I think I'll be doing a disservice if I don't mention the issue around how we can capacitate the renewable value chains. That's where the IDC is actually playing and trying to de-risk and enabling that space. The value chains that are required to ensure that the renewables that we want within the grid are enabled. And having said that, we are also aware that it's not just about enabling the value chain. We will also be required to start reviewing and partially reviewing or looking at various adjustments around local content requirements for construction and commissioning of new generation and storage capacity. Because if you are talking about the introduction of renewables, the storage capacity issue will need to be tackled, especially in the next 36 and 24 months, especially the discussion with local manufacturers. We will need to discuss that at length. And also, we will need also to discuss how we are going to strike a balance between short-term importation of components with the need to accelerate the phasing in of upstream industrialization that is going to be required in the medium and the long-term plan, and in the long term. So those are some of the solutions that I think that I'm hoping that we can tackle today, not just look at load shedding, but look at how in the short, medium, and long term we can tackle some of the complexity that we are facing. Having said that, we're all aware of the Just Transition Framework that the president, that was handed to the president in July, and what it means for our industrialization and what it means specifically for the energy sector. And I'm hoping the panelists today will be able to tackle some of the issues that are raised by this framework and actually touch on the implementation that will be required, especially from the private sector and through partnerships. What is it that will need to be put in place to fast track the implementation of this Just Transition Framework? And for me, I think what I'll be keen on is how to understand is how do they foresee us managing both the social and economic consequences of those policies that we would have to put in place, but still putting at the center of that human development issues in this as part and parcel of decision making. The IDC has just approved its Just Transition Framework aligned to this National Just Transition Framework, and we are utilizing actually to drive our investment in the energy space. I must mention that. But in conclusion, some of the opportunities that we are seeing as the Industrial Development Corporation is that in the next, starting from last year until 2025, we are seeing a lot of investments around renewable energy. We're seeing a lot of associated technology advances and new employment and livelihood opportunities. As you would know, we're not just driving industrial development. For us, it's keen to create sustainable job opportunities as part of industrialization. At the center of this, we are very much aware of coal stakeholders, coal sector stakeholders and community who will be actively seeking opportunities for economic diversification. There will also be an increasing demand, domestic and international demand for, of course, climate resilient agriculture, infrastructure, housing, and cleaner transport. And for us, those are key sectors which will have an impact on the energy space. And beyond that, in the immediate term, we see that as the transition accelerates, we will see a need for very rapid investment, which will be required for our transmission lines and technologies, for power sector, for power generation and storage. And that will allow us to actually get to a point where we get more reliable and cheaper electricity, which will actually promote this sustainable economy and job creation that we are after. All of this, we see it as directly, assisting the coal sector, which we will need to assist as we transition or as we drive this transition in South Africa and beyond. However, beyond 2030, we envision that we will have a more affordable and reliable electricity system. However, that will require us to sort out some of the key solutions that I touched on earlier on around the authorization of the transmission company, the restructuring of the tariff, dealing us with our distribution and generation infrastructure challenges, and our value chain at large. So that is where I'd like to end, but so that I can allow our panelists to give their views on what I've touched on. I've touched on a number of solutions that I think we need to bring on the table to actually drive sustainable energy. And I'm keen to hear what their views are, and I'm keen to see the solutions that they're already putting in place around, be it hydrogen, be it electric cars, be it the advances in technologies. But at the center of it, I'll be keen to hear them. How do we actually ensure that communities and households are less exposed to energy poverty as they are currently experiencing now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mpati. Truly insightful discussion and engaging further on that note. Without further ado, I'm going to be introducing the panelists that are joining us on this particular panel discussion. And thank you very much for taking time. And as I do the introductions, we'll then ask particular speakers to then kickstart and perhaps pick up on some of the nuances that Dr. Mpati reiterated there. With us, ladies and gentlemen, joining us on the Sustainable Seminar, or rather Sustainable Energy Seminar, regarding the chat around the energy crisis, we have Mr. Lawrence Pratt, who is the Principal Researcher at CSIR. Welcome, Mr. Pratt. We also have Mr. Davies Nichols, who's the Chairman of the Board at the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. I'm assuming, by my gut feeling, it's Miss Majubeng Mantata, who's the Acting Head at Energy, Environment and ICT, which is DBSA. We also have Mr. David Lipschitz, who's the CEO and founder at My Power Station. Thank you so much to all our panelists that are joining us this morning. Please kindly open up your videos so we can see your wonderful faces, and we'll then ask that you pick up on some of the narrations that were made by Dr. Mpati and also perhaps just introduce yourself, your organization, and the sentiments that you share around this energy crisis, because we really are in trouble. Can we start with Mr. Pratt? Then we'll have David Lipschitz, and then we'll have David Nichols, and then we'll have Mojubeng, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Pratt.
Okay. Good morning. Yeah, thank you for having me. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Super. Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure where I want to jump in, but just maybe I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from the other panelists as well. But you know, my expertise and where I bring to the table here is specialization in the PV system, right? So we focus on quality and reliability of PV modules that go into the systems, and so we just want to make sure that, you know, when people talk about loading up renewables, particularly loading up solar generators in South Africa, that we do the right thing now at the early stages to ensure that the plants are built with high quality and high reliability, so that we actually do get the returns on investment that we expect to see, and we can minimize the risks associated with O&M issues and troubles with the maintenance and ongoing operation of the plant. And I think what we see now, and certainly what I hear a lot in the news around the existing national generation fleet, fossil-based primarily, are issues around O&M. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake as we build out the renewable energy systems.
Okay.
I think I'll
Thank you
leave
very
it there.
much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. We're looking forward to engaging further on that point, particularly about generators as well. Mr. David Nichols, or was it Lipschitz? You both are David.
I'll go if somebody wants me to.
Yes, we'd love you to.
Okay.
Okay, let's have Mr. Nichols, and then we'll have Mr. Lipschitz. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. Bit of background for myself. I hate to say this too loudly, no one knows where I live, but I worked for Eskom for 34 years. I retired in end of 2018. And I'm now the chairman of NEXA, which is a nuclear energy corporation in South Africa. But I wanted to put a difference through, because there was a comment made by Landilwe, who said it was a structural and complex issue. And the second one she made was discussed with storage. And I'll just discuss those two a little bit, if I may. I think that we've got to be careful that sustainability has a number of issues. It's got to be technically sustainable. It's got to be able to prove and to work. It's got to actually be scalable to the size needed. There's no point having a little lab experiment which you can't make big. It's got to meet the customer's needs. And it's quite important to understand that we talk about the customer's needs in megawatts and megawatt hours, but dispatchability becomes an issue here. And yes, if you just had a gas turbine fleet, you can meet all the needs of the system. You can run as you require to run, keep the lights on. But if you're actually going for renewables, then you must be careful that you're actually required to include storage, which is horribly expensive at the moment, backup power system, which is an alternate power system, and some kind of system inertia, which rotating machines provide you, but inverters don't. So there's a tendency to compare a complete solution, let's take gas turbines as an example, with a part solution, which is like, say, solar, which only meets your needs when the lights on. Nothing wrong with solar, but it's part of a bigger system. You've got environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable, and politically sustainable. In other words, you've got to be popular, and that, fortunately, is far too important nowadays. The engineering is often less important. And you've got to have security of supply. In other words, we could not, for example, in South Africa, rely upon all our energy coming from the Grand Inga dam scheme up in thing. But I think I want to put a comment that I think we're seeing a worldwide crisis in the power industry. And this comes back to the structural and complex mission, which is that the current new market model post the 1990s that everyone says is the solution, because the old model was going to fail. Not that it had failed, it was going to fail. The new one is IPPs with multiple distribution companies and then ISMO tying it all together. That's basically the model that's on the table at the moment. Unfortunately, there is extremely large amount of evidence that that model structurally doesn't actually meet the requirements of the market. We had a 98 energy policy, which was not implemented because it was not practical. Eskom was split in those days in about 2000 to generation and emission distribution. but no free market IPPs came to the market. And of interest, in 2004, having been told not to build anything and shut down its entire departments that related to new build. There was not a single person in Eskom who had a job description, including the word new build in it. We went from that to, in 2004, being instructed to build Medupi, Kasili, and Ingula. So it went from nothing at all to the two biggest projects in the Southern Hemisphere in 24 months with bulldozers. And then in 2008, the financial model said Eskom abandoned plans to build the follow-on machines. The coal 3, the nuclear 1, the pump storage 2 were all abandoned into end of 2008 because of the model didn't support them. This model, we've seen the European Union and the UK in an incredible crisis with their problem. And it's not just the Russian gas, the Russian war. This started before the Russian war. UK energy prices have gone up by a factor of 2 or 3, as have most of European ones. They're talking of subsidizing the industry to the tune of £150 billion at the moment in UK to keep the prices down. That system is failing. There's no question that model in Europe, which is a reference model, has failed in Germany. It has failed in the rest of the European countries. The Texas grid failure in early 2021 was a function of lack of long-term planning. Again, because they were purely an energy market, nothing else. There was no central planning. The California rolling blackouts are ongoing. And just to add to this connection, the Australian grid system, which was privatized in '98, completely collapsed in June this year, and the state took over control for a few days only of all the dispatching instructions to all the power stations to the market. So I don't want to put that comment in, which is, I think we underestimate the degree to which that market is the market model is driving the problem we've got. And the assumption in the mid-1990s was, oh, but the old model won't work in the future, and we must go to something else. So let's just talk about what actually is required for a grid system. I just put a thoughts in Saga. It needs to lead economic demand, not follow it. We're seeing that in this country. From 2007 onwards, this crisis is not now. From 2007 onwards, no heavy industry was constructed because nobody had certainty of power. So essentially our GDP growth leveled and demand growth, which had grown at 3.5% from 82 to 2007, has stagnated and gone down. That's not good engineering. That's just, there's no capacity. You've got to have adequate reserves, capacity management, robust for cold winters. So you must have the power for the emergency. But the real problem that's driving this difficulty, and it's across the board, is that large power stations have a 15+ year startup date. From the date somebody says, I think I'll build a power station, to the day that large power station is online, is at least 10 years, 15 years. And that includes things like natural gas. We say natural gas is quick, for example, but you've got to build the infrastructure to store and transport the gas. And that's not available in this country today. That'll take us a few years to. And it's probably 30 years to get your money back from the investment. But the trouble is the politicians have, if we're lucky, a 5-year horizon of interest. As far as they're concerned, if I can defer something and I would almost guarantee today that our president is concerned about deferring everything beyond December. Never mind 2024, when the election happens, December is more important to him. And lastly, the financiers, if you're lucky, are looking at a 10-year future.
Sure.
So clearly, the politicians and the financiers don't want to get involved in large-scale power generation, and you hence get the problem we've got now, the problem there. And this then generates inherent state guarantees. Every South African large-scale power generation system has got state guarantees. They're either given implicitly to Eskom or explicitly to an investor. But my discussions with people in the EIUG has been that the problem is when they've got all the deal sorted out, who takes the risk? And the answer is they're looking for the state to take it. Even the Munichs are coming out and saying, we have I saw Etiquini had its IRP announced, I think last week or something. They first announced it in a meeting. And they've assumed they're going to get sovereign guarantees for this entire system. But secondly, what you've got to understand that you've got socio-economic cross-subsidization. Again, which is fundamental. But Eskom's now saying, if you want us to actually have a properly cost-effective tariff, we're going to put the standing charge up to over R1,000 a month for every connection. And we're going to bring your cost per kilowatt hour down to about R1.20 from the current R2.70. That's not what social was. And then you've got, so I just want to comment says that I think we've got to be careful that, and you asked me to go on, I'm a bit over long, I apologize, but essentially, I've got the problem that not that technology, but about the market model, which everyone is trying to flog us, is not working. I feel we're a bit like the USSR in 1990. There were a pile of hardline communists who said the reason the USSR failed was because it wasn't communist enough. It's notable we've had 90 years of success of running grids, and in the last 20 years, they're falling apart. And everyone says they're falling apart because the new model is not being applied vigorously enough. I'm actually putting forward that maybe the new model is not the model it should be. With that, I will go. I will shut up. I've gone too long, but thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. We have a lot to pick up on just from the sentiments that you shared there. Mr. Lipschitz, do you mind coming in there?
Thank you, Thabang. Can I share my screen?
With absolute pleasure, you may.
Let me just give me the ability.
Sure.
Oh wait, I've got it now. Hold on.
Perfect.
Just find it. So I'm just waiting for it to come up.
Okay, no problem.
I'm not sure why it's not showing. Just give me a second. I'm just going to do something here. It's just showing me blanks. It's not showing me. Okay, what I wanted to show, just try this. Oh, okay, I've got a different problem. Sorry,
Okay.
give me a second. I'm just sorting it out.
No problem.
Oh,
Should we?
I won't.
Would you like?
No, it's. I'll have to quit and come back. Let's just leave it. What I wanted to show you is that I've got a graph that I've been producing since 2010.
Okay.
And what it shows is how the cost of electricity from, say, Eskom has increased from about 30 cents to R1.60 now. The cost to me has increased from 50 cents to R3.30. According to the NERSA increases, it should have increased to R3.06. So the extra 25 cents is for cross-subsidization. The actual price increase of inflation from 50 cents takes us to about R1.20. So my electricity cost is 3 times more than inflation would have been in the past 12, 14 years. The cost of electricity from photovoltaic panels, grid tie, has come down from R6.67 a kilowatt hour in 2008 to 60 cents now. And the cost for, if you include batteries in that equation, which I've got another graph of, has come down from, let me just get there. Sorry, just to read you, from 15 Rand a kilowatt hour, including batteries, to R3.06, R3.31 now. We actually hit grid parity with batteries this year. From a small scale point of view, the big players, the nuclear power station engineers, the coal engineers, and we do still need those kinds of power stations in our grid. Although I like to say the only nuclear power station we actually need is the sun. We definitely need that one. And we're going to need coal power stations probably for the next 100 years, at least as backup, because we sometimes have cloud. We can have a cloudy day with a PV system and we get as much energy as on a sunny day, even sometimes more energy, because clouds keep the heat out and make the PV system more efficient. If it's raining, then maybe my system produces 10% of what it can produce. But if you look at PV costs coming down 90% in the past 12 years, and including batteries, lithium-ion batteries especially, coming down 95% in the past 10 years, then the whole homeowner segment can be taken off the grid instantly. Okay, not with, I'm saying there's 28 gigawatts on the grid from Eskom. There should be 60 already from Eskom. So as I said in a presentation on Sunday morning, Eskom are load shedding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're at stage 32 before we get to stage 1, if you know what I mean. And as Mr. Nichols said, the textile industry got closed and so many other industries got closed, not because of China, but simply because we didn't have enough electricity and at the right price. So the other thing is that, so I'm saying that from a homeowner, small scale point of view, we can run our entire grid with PV and some backup. The backup might be gas generators, it might be coal power stations that might need to run for 12 days a year. So it's a different kind of system. It's much easier to install 100 or 200 megawatt coal power stations embedded in the grid than it is to go and build these big monsters that take, as Mr. Nichols said, 10 to 15 years to produce. One thing I disagree with him on is that if you go to the JP Morgans of this world, they understand that it takes 10 years to build a power station, plus the 5 years it takes to plan them. They understand that the break even is after 25 years after go live. So their financial models are a 40-year financial plan. It's kind of like if you start a textile factory. I've been involved in textiles. It takes an average textile factory 10 years to break even, but it's cash flow positive from minute one. So the people that are financing textile factories have got a 20-year plan to get their money back. And after 20 years, the system becomes a cash cow. So if you take energy, 25 years to get payback, and then the last 15 years, the electricity is so cheap that the power station becomes a cash cow. So Eskom saying we need to have cost-reflective tariffs, is a complete misunderstanding of power station build. So there's that issue. The just transition is also a slight misnomer because, in 1850, when electricity came on the grid, we had massive coal investment. In 1910, we started with oil, and that caused a big problem in the industry because you had hundreds of people moving coal around, okay? And with a turn of a switch, you could open an oil pipeline. And so there was a huge outcry in 1910, hey, we can't do this, we're going to lose jobs. But what actually happened is coal production went up and oil production went up. And the same thing is happening with gas and with renewable energy. The world doubles electricity consumption every 20 years. It doesn't matter how efficiently we are. The world doubles electricity. So, if you look at the amount of PV coming on stream, if you look at the amount of coal coming on stream, if you look at the amount of nuclear coming on stream, there's a lot coming on stream, mostly in China. And then people say, that my last point for now, people say, that we need to catch up. Well, the only reason we're behind is because our coal is being burnt in China and Israel and Germany and other parts of the world. So in my opinion, our dirtiness is where our coal is burnt, not where our coal is produced. We could actually be producing all of that electricity. In my opinion, South Africa should be at 300 gigawatts already, not 30. And Eskom should be the stock exchange of electricity. All the electricity flows via Eskom, because if I sell electricity and my neighbor buys it at say 7 p.m. because I've got a battery bank and I can supply electricity at that time, and my neighbor's prepared to buy it from me, then Eskom and the cities make money out of that transaction. So there's a whole mindset shift that's needed, and I think that's where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lipschitz. I think you also added quite a lot of nuggets that are worth engaging on, particularly the state of Eskom. And perhaps it is by choice that they choose to remain underdeveloped when it comes to these, the mindset and ideologies and so forth. So we can actually talk about it. Can we have Ms. Mantata just to come in there, and then we'll have Mr. David Kawesha. Mojabeng?
Good afternoon to the fellow panelists, as well as to the moderator. And the DBSA would like to thank you for the opportunity and the invite to the Sustainability Summit of 2022. My name is Mojabeng Mantata. I'm currently the Acting Head of Energy, Environment and ICT at the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which is a state-owned DFI whose mandate is the development, financing, as well as implementation of projects in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the DBSA as a bank has committed and supports the Presidential Climate Commission in its just transition framework. And in particular, the DBSA is in agreement with the PPC's framework and looks forward to supporting the decarbonization of our economy and industrial base, as well as the electricity system, by actively supporting Eskom as it retires and refuels or repurposes power stations, as it invests in grid and transmission investments, as well as it rapidly supports, the ramp up of renewable projects. So the DBSA internally as a bank and as it funds and it deals with its stakeholders has developed its own just energy transmission framework based on three key principles, which are least cost, inclusive growth, as well as supporting a gentle low carbon transition. The bank 2050 and will align its portfolio by 2030 to align with the Africa case. So from a financing perspective and mandate perspective, the DBSA's energy funding activities include the generation of power, investment in grid and transmission assets. It has a keen interest in storage, battery, energy efficiency. And for those who are, on the line, who are aspirant IPPs and project developers, the DBSA has structured its financial offering and financing services, to support just energy transition, in particular, continuing with its municipal financing opportunities, offering project finance capabilities, as well as corporate lending. And of particular interest is that the DBSA has developed two specific projects to support just energy transition. The first being its climate finance facility, where together with the GFC, which is the Green Climate Finance Fund, has set aside a pool of capital to support climate mitigation and adaptation projects. And then lastly, it has developed what it refers to as, an acronym is EGIP, which is the Embedded Generation Investment Program, that looks to support commercial, industrial, residential, as well as municipal renewable energy projects within our borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Majubeng. We are just waiting for Mr. David Kawesha to come back. But whilst we wait for him back, perhaps we can just go back to the discussion. Mr. Pratt, you mentioned about, having high quality generators. How do you think we can effect that, particularly in the context of this energy crisis?
So high quality generators, PV generators I'm referring to, hey?
Okay, yes, indeed.
So I mean, it comes down to good quality design, a good quality components, and a good business model. And, I think, and I think this is maybe a role where the question from our introductory speaker was around, what's the role of the private sector in this space? And I think there are numerous experts and professionals who build PV power plants, from the smallest rooftop systems to the largest utility scale. And I think, that they know what to do, and they know the value of good quality components. And I think that, one of the things that I'm seeing, sort of generally speaking, is, and I don't know if it's a South African culture or what. I come from the United States myself, so I just have a little bit of an outsider's view, if that hasn't been clear from my accent. There's a bit of a sense to go after the cheapest product and hope it works. And that's not necessarily the case. And, one of the things that we've done around the business model for procurement on our own campus, we have 2 megawatts of PV at the CSR in Pretoria. So we talk the talk and we walk the walk. We have our own generators, so we understand the issues, the pros and the cons.
Sure.
And we link the construction and the performance to the EPC and hold them accountable for guaranteed performance ratios. And I think it's a fairly standard concept in all kinds of construction projects, but I think it's also very important in PV generators. If the EPC is required to produce a certain level of electricity over the first 3 years, they're going to design and build a system that they know they can do it. If the
Sure.
EPC is motivated to get the lowest price to beat out the competition, regardless of the production, they're going to give you a different system. So I think, it's all of those factors. It's having people with good experience. It's having the right business contract in place, and,
Sure.
and it's having the right sort of we call it pre-construction testing. And, this is something that power plant generators, EPCs do all across the globe to ensure the quality of their PV generators. They insist and require pre-construction testing. They might even do sort of pre-module selection testing through the likes of PVDL and the PV scorecard, and just knowing what you're getting and ensuring that the product that you've chosen is actually what's being delivered to you from the manufacturer, whether the
Right.
manufacturer is based in South Africa or overseas. So I think all
Sure.
of those things come together.
I think you're quite right in saying the context in South Africa and Africa at large is different, completely different in terms of the infrastructure, and also, looking into address the informal economy and how energy affects that. So we'll have perhaps Mr. Lipschitz later comment on that. Mr. Kawesha, welcome back.
Thank you.
Please do introduce yourself and offer us some light onto this particular discussion.
Thank you very much, and apologies for that. It was a bit of a update on the PC side, so I had to let it restart. But much appreciated, and thank you for such a wonderful panel, and I think very insightful discussion, as sort of laid out initially. And so I'm David Kawesha. I head the Just Transition Office at SASL. And I think in terms of the discussion, and the challenge was put out as to what sort of solutions I think we're all looking for. And I think it's important to recognize that the cost of inaction is just not, it's not affordable. So certainly we have to do something. I guess the question is, of course, how, and also being able to do it in an aspect that was mentioned, of course, in a just and equitable manner. So I think from a SASL perspective, what we've done is we updated our future strategy last year, which really laid out our decarbonization pathway, aiming for 30% emission reduction targets, and then net zero by 2050, net zero ambition by 2050. So lofty goals, but it is covered with well laid out plans up to 2030 in terms of how we intend on decarbonizing. But I think also what's important is this has to be enabled by certain elements, such as, of course, grid infrastructure to be able to integrate renewables. And given that our long-term ambition is really driving towards the downstream element in terms of renewable energy is one aspect. From our perspective, it's really focused on hydrogen and green hydrogen specifically, and the derivatives thereof, because we believe there's a key competitive advantage in that element as well, in terms of that side of the value chain. And I think it was mentioned earlier around how do we take advantage of those. And I think we do have the ingredients in terms of renewable energy resources in South Africa. We've got platinum group metals within South Africa. We, of course, can lean on our specific FD Fischer-Tropsch technology, which then allows us to produce sustainable products and chemicals, fuels and chemicals, in terms of for the wider markets. So that's one critical element in terms of that provides a little bit of a solution space, but it's got to also be enabled by the ability to place products in the global market. So here you look at ensuring that the trade agreements that we have and the regulations that developed countries are putting in place do not restrict companies like ourselves and countries like ourselves as we transition to place, let's say, transitional products before they are fully green. So that is a critical element in ensuring that we solve for those aspects. I think another critical element I just want to touch on is a little bit around the work that the NBI did and the National Business Initiative did, which showed that we would need around, I think, 6 to 7 gigawatts just of renewable energy per annum. And from today, not in terms of to just essentially move to a renewable dominated grid. So it's a significant challenge, and I think it's been described in details around what are those enabling factors that we need. But from SASO specific side, of course, what we're doing is as part of our procurement program, we went out to the market for 600 megawatts, and part of it is as a key localization component. Those are key tangible elements to try and help grow the local capacity within the market. Granted, it's not gonna, it's part and parcel of the solution, but I think it helps to essentially grow the market in that regard. The other element is, of course, we're producing our first volumes of green hydrogen in our Sasolburg facility in the coming year, in 2023. And that's also an element in terms of how to start to grow that side of the business on the downstream element, to ensure that you start to introduce that into the value chain, people get comfortable. Standards are then set to be ensured that that product can then be utilized further on. So if you look at it, those are critical components in terms of how we can transition in terms of the renewable energy dominated system. But this has also got to be enabled by collaboration and partnerships. And here, that's why we've set out a number of partnerships. We put in a memorandum of cooperation with the IDC last year, and looking really at trying to grow the green hydrogen ecosystem in South Africa. One of our flagship projects is then the Pukubai project, which is, it's really to be off the ground, it to be large. And there, of course, you need to working with the Northern Cape government to then see how best do you actually materialize a project of that nature and of that scale, which is then looking at doing it in phases. We're currently in the pre-feasibility phase. And then at full capacity could potentially have 9 gigawatts towards 9 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. So it's a significant scale. It's not, but I think we need the key components and steps put in place today to help us really realize the large scale project opportunities. So from business really driving catalytic projects to ensure that they start to drive the transition in terms of towards low carbon solutions and the green economy. And I'll leave it there, and for the other panelists to come in as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kawesha. Perhaps, Mr. Nichols, you can come in here just as an inference from some of the highlights that Mr. Kawesha has shared. I don't want to call you all by your first names because we've got 3 Davids here, so it's going to be confusing.
No problem, that's fine. It's the first time I've been on where there's more than.
I once won a project where there were 9 of us in the project and 7 were called David.
Oh no!
That was complete chaos.
And we wouldn't know who killed Goliath. So I mean, really,
yeah,
a serious problem. Just on
I'm
that
sure the
note,
propaganda machine was in there somewhere.
Just on that note, Mr. Nichols.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question whilst you are answering Mr. Kawesha's insights? How do you think we can build a robust energy system, particularly in South Africa and in Africa? In just answering the question of transition that Mr. Kawesha had mentioned.
I worry, or let's ask the second question first. We've just got to go out and build something. I'm sorry, we have people, we have the current disaster situation, coming back to what Mr. Lipscher said earlier. You know, people say, oh, we don't need any more power stations because we're at 35 gigawatts is all the demand is. And the demand is 35 gigawatts because we didn't have the power to justify the industry to have more. So it's a vicious chicken and egg situation. We should now be at about 60 gigawatts of demand if you look at the Eskom growth for 25 years from 82 to 2007. 2007, the lights went out for industry, no new building going on. But in terms of how do you build a new one, you've got to commit to doing it. And as someone mentioned earlier, money is available. You can raise money for projects given you've got some kind of guarantee. I think in terms of the discussion of the renewables and the hydrogen economy, and I think it's a very exciting prospect, but I do worry slightly that we have a habit of having future projects based on a technology we haven't quite mastered yet.
Sure.
I'll give you a silly example. People say we can put hydrogen down natural gas pipelines if we had any, but assume we had it. The problem is the energy density by volume of hydrogen is actually quite low. So your gas pipelines actually become less effective as you put more hydrogen down, and quite dramatically so. Also, hydrogen, by the way, leaks quite nicely. It's the smallest molecule we've got, so it actually gets out. So leakage becomes an issue. So I think there's a whole pile of issues there. I would like to see these go forward, but I suspect that the transition we're looking for may be, in some cases, slightly mythical. Let me give you an example, if I can, of another thing. In 1994, cell phones came into the country. Everybody said the problem with cell phones was there wasn't enough of a market for them, and they wouldn't be able to justify building all the cell towers because only the rich and famous would have them. That clearly was totally untrue. But if you turned around to the head of MTN and Vodacom in '84 and you had said, my gardener will have two, my maid will have one, her daughter will have one, and her grandson will have two, they'd look at me and say, you're out of your skull. That won't happen. In your house, you'll have one for yourself and your wife and me. So the cell phones absolutely changed the industry, changed the telecoms in Africa completely, with no policy discussions.
Sure.
Nobody did that. So I worry slightly that, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be support to startups, that's a different discussion. But I'm not, if people believe that mini grids and renewables and local systems are going to work, then why do they need the support? Why isn't my little closed, my gated community we live in, 130 houses, why aren't we driving our own system rather than relying on the grid? And I think we misunderstand him. So that's my sort of comment. So generally, I'm very supportive of new technology things going forward, absolutely. But I do worry that we are basing everything on storage will become cheaper.
Sure.
If you're, and the reality, Andre de Ruyter said recently in a conference, said, look, if you're going to build storage, you're going to build pump storage schemes like in Gulu and Drakensberg and Palmyra and those things. You're not going to build batteries because they're not cost effective. And as batteries are now fundamentally driven by material costs, there is not much prospect for them going down in price. In fact, with the recent quadrupling of the price of lithium concentrate, the price of lithium-ion batteries is now going up dramatically. Because you're now at a point where only 15% is actually. So I think we've got to worry about, are we being too fashionable sometimes? I'll say the obvious statement, which you're probably expecting from me because you put nuclear next to my name. It's very simple. If you look around the world at countries that have got low cost, low carbon, reliable grids, the top 8 of those are all either large scale hydro and or large scale nuclear. France is the obvious nuclear one, someone like Norway is the obvious hydro one, but across the world, that's pretty much a standard setup. That if you're going for low carbon, dispatchable, low cost, reliable systems, you end up with nuclear and hydro.
Sure.
And the problem with that is very simple, is it tends to squeeze everybody else out of the solution. If Eskom had not been told in the mid-90s to change its business model, and no longer be the supply of last resort and not be guaranteed returns, would we be still in the crisis we've got now? But also, would we be making a lot of money for the developers? And the answer is, if you want to make money from an Eskom deal in the old days, you had to actually build something, a valve, a pump, pour concrete or something. You didn't make money from having a deal. Are you with me? Sure. Because the deals were big deals. I'm not saying there wasn't corruption. Don't necessarily. I'm not for second. But so that's my sort of comment on that one. But I think generally the hydrogen economy is interesting. I'm not quite yet seeing the economics of it. I have a problem of why we are going to be able to make hydrogen here and ship it to Europe cost effectively. Why can't they make it in Europe? I've heard rumors Europe's quite windy. I used to live there. And it can get quite windy. So the idea that our power prices are going to be low enough compared to their power prices of renewables to actually make shipping hydrogen halfway around the world viable, I have a problem with that. I'm not sure. Maybe someone's got better numbers than I've got, but it seems odd to me.
Sure.
So that's my sort of.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. Perhaps Mr. Lipschitz can come in here, then we'll have Ms. Mantata. Mr. Lipschitz, I think, in your commentary, you can add some of the questions that Mr. Nichols has posed in this discussion. You're muted. Please do unmute.
I got a message straight away, as you were saying. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. I agree with Mr. Nichols that we do need to be building things. There is this. There's a new word I learned in the last 2.5 years. It's called paltering. Paltering. It's when you say one truth and you hide another truth. So Eskom will say, we started our new build late. It's true. We started our new build 5 to 10 years after we should have. And the reason we did that is because we had the social contract. We were trying to uplift everybody. And the focus moved in government from energy to the shift in what people needed.
Right.
So, there should have been some of both, but it was like a major diversion. And it was probably necessary for 10 years after 1994 that happened. And then there was a shift back to looking at, how do we grow the economy? And so Medupi and Kusile and Coal 3, which hasn't been started yet, all 5 gigawatt coal power stations should have been online. So Medupi should have been complete in 2015, and Kusile should have been complete in 2018, and Coal 3 should have been finished this year. If you just look at Ngula and Medupi and Kusile, and you only look at when Eskom said those power stations came on stream, and you look at the gap between the baseline in 2008 and the actual, as it came on, you'll discover there's a 45 trillion rand gap. That's equal to 10 billion rand a day of load shedding. So the economy lost in the last 14 years 10 billion rand a day because Ngula and Medupi and Kusile are late. Now, I wrote an article a few years ago in 2015 where I said that South Africa, with its low technical capability in general, because of the history and all the things we know about, lends itself to a renewable energy system, a system where you can install a system in 3 days. If it takes 4 days, you're late. It's like you buy an air conditioner for 10,000 rand. If it costs 12,000 rand, you're already 20% over budget. You repair your car, and the mechanic says it's going to cost you 2,500 for the service. If it costs 3,000, you're over budget. And that's only for half a day of work, for example. So, the problem with Medupi and Kusile and these huge power stations and nuclear is it takes so long to build, you don't know when you're behind. You don't know when you're over budget. You have so much technical competence that's required in terms of electrical engineers, civil engineers, chemical engineers, every kind of engineer, scientists, financial experts that can give you finance for 40 years. When you bring a PV system onto the grid at 57 cents a kilowatt hour, or you bring a battery-based system onto the grid at 3.50 a kilowatt hour, you know immediately what your break-even point is. It's instant. 10 years ago, then in 2008, when I put my first PV system, backup system, when we started having load shedding, and I bought a diesel generator, it was loud and horrible and stinky, and a lot of pollution. And then 3 months later, I threw that out. And I put in my first PV system just to run the basic loads. And my neighbor said, David, you're an idiot. Why would you spend 5 rand a kilowatt hour when you can spend 50 cents a kilowatt hour? And I would say to them, you've just bought a new car. It's costing you 200 rand an hour to drive the car. I've got an old car, which is paid off. And I choose to make sure that I never have load shedding. And in my house, we haven't had load shedding since 2008. And in 2020, because of the big cost decrease, we replaced that entire system with a system that does basically 10 times as much capability for the same price as in 2008, and actually in real terms, half the real cost. So I just think that, I know that Mr. Nichols and the other people, the big players, to run a smelter, to run a steel maker, to run a big car producing company, to run all of those kinds of, to run a big shopping center, we're still going to need, they're the base load that make the coal power station viable. We're still going to need coal for at least the next 30 to 50, 80 years. Okay. But we don't need the coal in the small, industry for homeowners. So my entire roof should be covered in PV, photovoltaic panels. My garage should be full of batteries. I should be making electricity during the day, fill my batteries up, and then sell electricity to Eskom at 9 o'clock at night. And I've been offering them that since 2008. But they won't come to the party. They think there's this myopia in government thinking that we need to make money in the grid. The localization thing is a myth as well, because there's 60 million people in South Africa that depend on electricity. There's 20 million people in South Africa that depend on electricity for jobs. even if we import everything from overseas, which we do, by the way, for nuclear power station, almost the entire nuclear power station comes from overseas, and that's okay. But it's not okay for a PV panel to come from overseas. You know, so it's about having the electricity. It's not about Eskom and its employees becoming rich at the whole country's expense. I don't think that Eskom are deliberately hurting the grid. I mean, that would be treason. You know, as I've said before, I don't think that's a deliberate thing. I think there's I worked in government for 2 years and I saw this project management issue. You know, the project manager might be 7 levels down in the organization. Okay. And in a private sector company, the project manager is responsible for the project. And if the CEO of the company comes in and says, what about this? The project manager will say, yes, sir, we can do that, but it's going to delay the project by 3 months and it's going to add R1 million to the budget. Do you want to do that now, or would you rather do that in 6 months' time when the project's complete? And then it's up to the CEO to do that. But you know, if Mr. Ramaphosa comes into the office, or Mr. Mantashe comes into the office, or the CEO of Eskom comes into the office and says, why don't we do this? You know, quite innocently, the project manager should say, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And I don't believe that's happening. I don't think we have people that have the guts, you know, to actually say that Medupi and Kusile were designed with 5 engines. They should have 4 engines, and we should have knocked out the middle one in 2010 when we realized we were late. So there's big decisions and big project management criteria that need to happen. And there's like a juggernaut of, you know, David and Goliath. That was a good thing because, you know, David fought Goliath, but David was the guy with the little stone. You know, he was used to, you know, killing the lion, for example. So he knew how to do that. Goliath was this massive 8-foot giant who had 2 attendants to carry his sword. You know, he moved really slowly. You know, it's like the speedboat and the aircraft carrier. You know, the aircraft carrier takes a long time to turn. The speedboat turns instantly. It's the same with renewable energy. Renewable energy, as Mr. Nichols said, we can get that on the grid instantly, immediately. It doesn't matter where we get the stuff from. We need to make electricity as fast as possible. Eskom themselves have said we need 8 gigawatts in the next 2 years. You know, Vietnam, we heard the other day, added 9 gigawatts of rooftop PV in 1 year. So I believe that it's possible. The other thing is, even if lithium prices go up 20%, they've halved in the past 2 years. And they've come down 95% in the past 14 years. So we need to look at the whole trend and see where we're going, not just the last 20 minutes.
Sure. Quite a packed analysis there. Thank you so much, Mr. Lipschitz. Can we have Mr. Kawesha there just to answer some of the sentiments that Mr. Nichols and Mr. Lipschitz have added, particularly when it comes to South Africa importing all of the green hydrogen to Europe? What do you think about that?
Again, no, thank you, Japan, for that opportunity. I think it's just to add a little bit more color in terms of to the sort of the opportunity around hydrogen. I think it's important to recognize that most of the work in terms of is done through sort of collaboration and partnerships to ensure that you don't do it alone. So in terms of working with electrolyzer suppliers, I mean, South Africa is definitely well endowed in terms of with renewable energy. So in terms of that side of the equation is certainly a key advantage for us. Hydrogen can be transported in different forms in terms of either as ammonia. So that is one opportunity as well. And I think quite importantly is there are multiple end use applications. So the idea is not necessarily to look at hydrogen itself as a molecule, because the end use applications could then look at where it goes into sustainable fuels and chemicals. I mean, as SASO at the moment, we produce 2.6 million tons of gray hydrogen today. So in terms of the experience around handling the material, granted it's on a site, the knowledge is there. So transitioning to it's the same molecule, it's just derived slightly differently. So there's a lot of learnings in that regard that can be transitioned. And then the other element I think that's critically important is also understanding the sort of the market dynamics. Given the energy security issues in Europe is of course looking to diversify the energy sources, and hydrogen just being one of the potential energy sources that can be utilized. They're also looking at diversifying that, and of course South Africa becomes an opportunity in that regard. and hence why the German Chancellor came through to look at what the options and opportunities are, and as well as to ensure that the market development extends just beyond sort of your key role players, particularly if you look at potentially the Middle East. So that's the other element. And the other thing is the advantage that we would have in our SASO specifically, then look at which then looks at then converting and utilizing our Fischer-Tropsch technology to actually sustainable liquids, such as sustainable aviation fuels. So those are some of the considerations in terms of how you can then play in that particular market and look at the different aspects and look at the different elements around the value chain. Work certainly has to be done in terms of reducing the hydrogen costs, which need to come down to about $1 to $2 per kilogram. That's why the US government, through the Inflation Reduction Act, is essentially putting money to that respect. And then I think the other aspect is, of course, as I indicated, then working with the electrolyzer organizations and other partners to ensure that you can then reduce those costs. So I think I'll leave it there in terms of just a little bit more color to the hydrogen aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We did need the color indeed, because now we're trying to defeat this Goliath called load shedding in the room. Perhaps let's have Mr. Pratt come in there. Just as a principal researcher at the CSIR, I mean, apparently we've got about 1.3 billion people that are living without access to modern energy. How do you think we can connect to them more effectively besides generators and so forth? Mr. Pratt? Lawrence?
Sorry, yep, I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so remote access, access to electricity for remote sites. I think, solar with battery storage is just a great way to go. And there's, numerous examples. We've got a project at the UB in Upper Blinkwater in Eastern Cape right now, where we have a 75 kilowatt PV system and a 20 kilowatt wind system with a significant amount of battery storage and a local reticulation system that feeds a small community on the other side of a nature reserve. So they're a good 15 or 20 kilometers up a dirt road, and the expense of bringing in transmission lines doesn't justify the cost. So those kinds of projects. And then I've certainly got personal experience where a remote cabin in Maine in the United States has been fully powered by PV plus storage. I've done a little bit of work in Hammanskraal. It doesn't take much to put power in a small home in a township like that. It's one PV panel, one small inverter, and one battery. Price is still high. There's no contention about that. It's a question of whether you're willing to put I look at it as your prepaid electricity. This prepaid electricity business is fairly new to me since coming to South Africa. And really, when you're buying your own off-grid PV system, you're just doing a prepaid plan that's 10 or 15 years into the future, but it's the same concept. Pay for the electricity now that you're going to use into the future. So, and it's the scalability of the thing and the time to market, the time to deploy, to commissioning. Essentially, I think other speakers have already mentioned, really speaks volumes for the technology. If you want one panel, if you want 10 panels, if you want 100 megawatts. These things can be built by private sector experts in a short period of time, and with the proper interconnection to the grid, it's now power on the grid, albeit not necessarily at the right time, but that's another issue. Off-grid stuff, certainly the way to go for providing access to electricity in remote areas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pratt. We have a question on our chat, which I believe that all our panelists here can answer. So perhaps we'll start with you, Mr. Nichols, and then we'll go to Mr. Lipschitz regarding this question, and everybody else, Mr. Kawesha as well. And then I will ask for you to prepare your closing remarks regarding this matter. So we have a question from Tabani, who then says, whoever can answer, I would like to know the fastest way to create a sustainable grid in South Africa. What energy source can we apply, be it coal or nitrogen, etc., would be best? And how long would it take? Would Eskom have to be privatized, or can it be fixed? So I think that's actually a twofold question. First being, how do we, or what can we use to create a sustainable grid in South Africa? What would be the fastest energy source to do so? Would it be coal, nitrogen, etc.? And how long would that take? And of course, would Eskom have to be privatized, or can it be fixed? Mr. Nichols?
Okay, I'm going to answer slightly. Every organization has 3 plans. One plan is where do I want to be in the long term? And the long term depends on who you're talking to, but for Eskom, that should be, or the country, it should be, the long term on the grid is probably 2040.
Yeah.
The second one is what's the short, and that plan must be credible. It must be based on what's really doable, not some belief in the future is what hand waving. The second one must be a plan, which is how am I going to keep things together today? And the third plan is the transition from where we are to, from the where you are today plan to the future. And those 3 plans must talk, but they're different plans.
Yeah.
So you've asked 2 questions. If you want a large grid system and you want it in a low carbon environment with a country with no hydro, then the economic answer which comes out and attacks you every time is to put large nuclear in, and it's worked. It's being done in Egypt now. It's being done in Oman, or in the UAE, sorry, in Middle East. It's being done in Bangladesh. It's being done in, and so on. It's a doable activity. People have done that and made it work. The second one is, what is the short-term plan to fix the current crisis? Because that long-term plan, realistically, is probably 10, 12 years in the future. If you start now with all the aggression in the universe, realistically, it'll make a difference in about 10, 15 years' time. And the short-term plan is at a domestic level, and I certainly agree with the comment about putting domestic PV makes good sense. I must admit I'm in the middle of, I have a diesel generator and my diesel bill is now getting rather excessive, so I'm thinking of putting solar panels on my roof for the obvious reason of my economics. But I think that, so in the short term, yes, there is a requirement to go for as much distributed power generation in the housing market as you can get, while trying to get the Eskom system working again. There's nothing wrong. The Eskom power stations aren't that old. They're getting older. But when something like Tutuka, which is like 30, 35 years old, is being unreliable, it's not a function of age. That's well inside the expected life of any station. So Eskom's got a management issue, I believe. So I come back to this fundamental. To me, there's 2 things you first do. Fix the short-term problem, which I believe is getting encouraging distributed generation on the basis that it will be for the next few years until it gets supplanted or possibly supported by centralized improvements, and improve Eskom. And the second one, and the third thing then is you've got to work a plan out which gets you from where you are now to where you want to be. And I really worry when people talk extensively about the transition plan without discussing that they have a plan for the present and a plan for the future. If one's developing, if I said to you, I'm going to go and drive some of my car in a minute, which I've got to, but I said, I'm not sure where I'm going, not sure where I'm starting from, but I'm doing the planning to do the journey, you would look a bit stupid. And I fear we are too busy in transition plans without having a clear idea and an agreed idea of what is the long-term plan for the country. And secondly, how are we going to fix the short-term problem? But they're different activities, because the long-term solution is probably not going to be in place for 10 years. If we say natural gas, getting the infrastructure in the country to store natural gas on the scale you need for that process is going to take us years. Getting the contracts in place will take us years. So basically, large-scale natural gas, I believe, is about 10 years away. So you've got to look at what you can do with now, and that is, I agree entirely with the plan A, fix Eskom. Plan B is to get the much local power. People like me being told it's worthwhile changing my generator for a solar panel and some batteries. But that's a view. You asked my views, there's my views.
Sure.
Clearly, my long-term view is simple. You just build nuclear power stations and it works. And you can see that by the fact that the only station, no one's questioning the age of the Coburg station. It's going on a 60-year life. The American station is saying we've got 80-year lives. It's well maintained because it's maintained in the law. So yeah, the long-term solution, build more nuclear power stations. And one last comment on me just quickly, slightly amusing. I always enjoy it when Cape Town Council says they want to reduce their carbon footprint for electricity, when their electricity comes currently from Coburg. and the carbon footprint of a nuclear power station is less than that of renewables. So that's a little bit of a light-hearted comment I'll make on the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. Your last sentiments there, Mr. Lipschitz, and we'll have Mr. Kawesha and Pratt, and then we close off the session quickly.
Okay. I'm going to answer the questions. I'm not going to fight Mr. Nichols about nuclear. We can probably spend the next 3 hours on that. One thing to say is nuclear is not entirely carbon friendly, because you have to get the uranium out the ground. You've got to enrich it. That requires energy. You've got to transport the uranium in secure transport. You've got to pour tens of thousands of tons of concrete to protect the building. Concrete is the world's biggest polluter, etc. But let's just answer these questions. The fastest way to get a sustainable grid, in my opinion, there's two things. One is to start building renewable energy with battery backup as fast as possible. I've got a plan. I know where I'm starting from. I know where I'm going. We could have 190 gigawatts on the grid, gigawatts of PV on the grid in 6 years with 5 terawatt hours of batteries, cheaper than we can do anything else. Okay. At the same time as that, we can build another 3 Medupis and Kusiles, okay, and end up with a total coal as 20% of the total of the, or 20% or less of the total energy being produced in South Africa. So we could actually decarbonize South Africa by building more coal power stations if we allow renewable energy in the grid. So we're still going to need, like I said before, we're still going to need the so-called base load. The base load is actually the smelter. It's not the power station. It's the load. The word is load. Load allows the power station to be built, because Eskom will go to Session Mine and say, will you, if we can supply with another gigawatt or 5 of electricity, will you buy that electricity for 40 years? And Session will say, yes, the life of our mine is another 90 years, for example. We can easily give you a contract for 40 years of electricity, and that base load allows the power station to be built. The last thing, just in this question, is that Eskom have got a big coal problem. And the coal is bad quality, and it's not designed for Medupi and Kusile. And as a scientist, I wrote to Eskom in 2010 and the government, and I said, Medupi and Kusile are supercritical power stations. They're never going to work, because historically, South Africa's always exported its best coal for exchange purposes, for Forex under apartheid, when we had to get Forex somehow. And then those engineers worked out how to take rubbish quality coal, highly abrasive, full of sulfur, and so on, and ash, and which is very abrasive, and build turbines and boilers that could manage that. You cannot put that kind of coal into a very high pressure system. Can Eskom be fixed? Yes, Eskom can be fixed. Should it be privatized? I don't think it's necessary. I think Eskom can double it in size, okay, whilst the whole private grid becomes exponential. And all of that electricity flows via Eskom's grid. So Eskom can be making 20 times as much money by withdrawing, focusing on what it's good at, coal, perhaps nuclear power stations. I don't think we need nuclear anymore, but we did in the past, and other things, gas, etc. You know, doing that and not doing any renewable. Let the renewable energy people do the renewable energy stuff. And then, you know, Eskom have got the backup and the capability and the virtual power station technology to actually hold everything together.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lipschitz. Truly insightful. Mr. Kawesha, just quickly your closing remarks, and then we'll have Mr. Pratt, please. Very quickly.
No. Thank you very much. Very, very insightful discussion. So I'm certainly it would go on for hours. But I think in terms of just last closing remarks, certainly I think it's important that Eskom transition the grid and essentially strengthen the infrastructure such that it actually allows greater penetration in terms of renewables. And I think also critically important is gas still has a role to play from a transitional perspective, given that it's still lower carbon than coal. I mean, from a SASO perspective, we look at gas in terms of to help with our process emissions, so they feed into actually the chemicals and the fuels that we produce. Whilst on the utility side, there the idea is then to, of course, convert from coal-based power to renewable power, as I indicated earlier. So I think it's certainly something that something that has to be done, and we have to see through. And those are tangible steps that can be done today. to ensure that the transition actually is real. And I think the one more important aspect, I think that we can't forget, given sort of the current social circumstances that we have in South Africa, is that the transition, there is a key opportunity in terms of the moving towards renewables. But I think it's important that you also don't leave the people who are in the core value chain essentially without employment if that happens too quickly. And there are actually employment opportunities that enables them to transition in terms of into the new value pools. And that's where a fine balance has to be found to ensure that we don't further exacerbate the inequality and unemployment that we already face. So it's a fine balance around the key technical solutions that I think have been discussed at length, and then as well as balancing in terms of with the socioeconomic considerations, which bits from SASO we face when you're actually then trying to see how do you transition. And so when you actually solve for the technical solution, you need to solve for the socioeconomic impact as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kavisha. Lawrence, can you just come in there just quickly, 30 seconds, and just close the speech? Shut it down.
So I think, I mean, it's a question of size of the grid, right? When you're talking about a resilient grid, if you want a grid for your home, you can have it up and running in 24 hours and you'll have a reliable grid for 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the bits and pieces of the system. A national grid, that 40-year timeline makes sense. And to me, I guess just kind of what I go back and kick around sometimes is the debate and the challenge between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla back in the day, AC versus DC. And Edison was actually running around to clients and trying to build local DC generators for a small, like a city block, while Tesla was busy trying to perfect the AC transmission transformers so he could ship power hundreds of miles away. And I think it's kind of interesting to see that we're maybe moving back towards more of a DC-based Edison model with rooftop PV systems on homes. And I think the commercial industrial guys can actually do a lot for themselves. And if we can get the big heavy users to also utilize some of their surrounding area to build their own PV plants, we can go a long ways towards alleviating with storage. Every time I say PV, I want to say storage now. We can go a long ways towards alleviating the issues at the national grid. So yeah, Edison versus Tesla, food for thought.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was an incredible panel. I think I have hope that load shedding will not destroy us. It will not, overcome us. So thank you so much for those insightful thoughts to all of you. And we're looking forward to engaging further in the future about the sustainability of energy. So happy load shedding for now. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you.